Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. I remember the sound first. Not the impact. Not the screaming. Just that horrible high-pitched screech of metal grinding against metal. Like the world was tearing apart in slow motion. It was raining that night. The kind of rain that blurred headlights and turned the road into a mirror. I was sitting in the passenger seat, my hand resting on the gear console, glancing over at my husband, Daniel. He looked tense. Eyes fixed on the road, jaw clenched. In the back seat she was laughing. I hated that laugh. Her name was Elise, his first love. The girl who meant nothing now. The girl who was just catching a ride. The girl he swore was just a friend from the past. But that night she wasn't in the past. She was sitting behind us, soaked from the rain, still radiant somehow, like the weather didn't touch her. Her perfume lingered in the car, sweet and sickening. And even though I tried not to notice, I saw the way he looked at her in the rearview mirror. The way his voice softened when he asked if she was cold. I should have said something. I should have told him to pull over, let her call a cab, or remind him that I was still sitting right there. But I didn't. I stayed quiet. I stared out the window, pretending not to care. That's when it happened. A flash of headlights. A horn blaring. Then nothing. The car spun. I couldn't tell if we were upside down or sideways, if we'd hit something or someone had hit us. My body slammed against the door. The seatbelt choked my ribs. Glass exploded. Time folded in on itself. And then silence. I opened my eyes to chaos. The windshield was gone. Rain poured straight into the car. Steam hissed from the engine. I was pinned, my legs crushed under twisted metal. Blood trickled down my face. Everything hurt. I turned my head, barely able to move. Daniel was moving. He had a gash on his forehead, but he was okay, walking, stumbling out of the car. I tried to speak. I tried to call his name. Daniel. But he didn't look at me. He looked at her. Elise was moaning, holding her arm, crying softly. She wasn't trapped like I was. She wasn't bleeding like I was. But Daniel ran to her. He pulled open the back door. He cradled her face. "Are you okay?" he asked, her voice trembling. I couldn't believe it. He reached in, pulled her out carefully, shielding her from the rain with his jacket. He whispered something to her. Something I couldn't hear, and helped her to the side of the road. I was still in the car. Still bleeding. Still calling his name. But he didn't come back. The first thing I felt was the weight. Not pain, not at first. Just this crushing heaviness, like something was pressing down on my chest, refusing to let me breathe. My eyelids were sticky. My mouth dry. Everything smelled like antiseptic and plastic. I was alive. I blinked up at the ceiling, blank and white. Fluorescent lights buzzed above me. Machines beeped somewhere close. I couldn't move my legs. My arms felt strapped, though I knew they weren't. My throat burned when I swallowed, and it took every bit of strength just to whisper. "Where?" A nurse leaned over me, smiling politely like she'd done this 100 times. She told me I'd been unconscious for 2 days. Internal bleeding. Multiple fractures. A collapsed lung. She said the doctors didn't know if I'd wake up. But I had. I asked for Daniel. My husband. She hesitated just a second before saying, "He's not here right now. I believe he stepped out earlier." Stepped out. I wanted to believe that. That he'd just gone to get coffee or talk to a doctor. That he'd be back in 5 minutes, holding my hand, eyes red from crying, telling me how scared he'd been. But he didn't come. He didn't come that evening. Or the next morning. Or even the next day. It was Elise who came first. Not to visit me, of course not. I saw her by accident, through the narrow gap in my curtain, walking down the hallway with a coffee in hand, wearing his hoodie. His hoodie. She laughed at something he said and he smiled. His hand brushed hers. And I didn't imagine it. I saw it. Clear as day. He wasn't grieving. He wasn't broken. He was fine. Fine enough to laugh. Fine enough to stand next to her like they belonged together. Fine enough to forget I was lying in a hospital bed. Bones shattered, lungs stitched back together. When he finally came into my room, it wasn't like I pictured it. No panic. No guilt. He just stood there awkwardly with a paper bag of grapes, like that made up for everything. "I didn't know if you'd make it," he said. Not "I'm sorry." Not "I should have come back for you." Just that. I looked at him and didn't recognize his face anymore. It was the same face I'd kissed on our wedding day. The same one that had smiled at me across dinner tables, whispered promises in the dark. But now all I saw was the man who made a choice. Not in a metaphorical sense, not the kind people make over months or years, but in a single brutal moment. A life or death decision. And he didn't choose me. He left me. Bleeding. Broken. Trapped in the wreckage of the car we both paid for, while he carried her out like some goddamn hero. He sat beside my bed, peeled a grape and offered it to me like nothing had happened. Like the last thing he remembered was just a bad dream we could shake off. I didn't take the grape. I didn't say anything at all. Because the truth was louder than anything I could have said. He had shown me who he was. And I was finally starting to believe it. People talk about betrayal like it happens all at once. Like one dramatic, devastating act breaks everything. But in my case, it wasn't just the car accident. That was just the final crack in something that had been slowly splitting for a long time. Lying in that hospital bed, I started to see it all clearly. Moments I had pushed aside. Things I excused because that's what you do when you're married and tired and hoping things will get better. I remembered the first time I heard Elisa's name. It was a year into our marriage. Daniel and I were having dinner. Quiet night, candles lit, music low. And he mentioned she'd messaged him. Just a casual, "Hey, remember me?" On some social media platform. He laughed it off. Said it was nothing. That she was getting married and just wanted to say hi. I didn't like the way his eyes lingered on her name. Or how he suddenly brought up old high school stories, ones I'd never heard before. "She was the first girl I really loved," he said once, almost like he forgot I was sitting right there. I told myself it was harmless. Nostalgia. Everyone has a past. Then there was the weekend he had to go to a friend's wedding out of town. He didn't want me to come, said it would be boring, just a bunch of college friends I didn't know. He sent me blurry pictures from a hotel lobby. A drink in his hand, no one else in the frame. When I asked who was there, he said, "No one important." He didn't lie. He just didn't tell the full truth. Later I found out Elise was there. I saw a tagged photo of her on someone else's profile, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, the same way mine used to. They looked comfortable. Too comfortable. And when I confronted him, he laughed. "You're being paranoid," he said. "She's just a friend. Don't you trust me?" So I dropped it. Again. I remembered the way he stopped asking how my day was. How he'd come home and scroll through his phone, smiling at messages I never saw. I remembered the nights he said he was tired, turning away from me in bed, his body stiff and cold. And worst of all, I remembered the way I stopped trying too. I used to wait up for him. Then I stopped. I used to make plans. Then I stopped. We both just existed beside each other. Like roommates who shared a bed and kept secrets in their pockets. Once, while folding laundry, I found a receipt in his jeans for a place we'd never been. 2 wine glasses. 1 dessert.
À single entrée.
He told me it was lunch with a colleague. I told myself it didn't matter. But it did. It all mattered. Every skipped conversation, every unanswered question, every quiet night filled with silence instead of warmth. It wasn't one moment. It was all the little ones that added up and hollowed us out from the inside. He still kissed me goodbye every morning. But I think we both knew the kiss meant less and less each time. And now, lying in a hospital bed because of his decision, I finally saw it all for what it was. This wasn't just an accident. It was the end of something that had been dying long before we crashed. He brought me orange juice. Not flowers. Not an apology. Not even a card with some half-hearted attempt to explain himself. Just orange juice. In a paper cup. No straw. Daniel sat beside me like nothing was broken. Like I wasn't sitting in a bed that beeped with every breath I took. My legs wrapped in casts. My ribs taped tight under a hospital gown. He sipped his coffee and scrolled through his phone like we were in a waiting room, not in the wreckage of our marriage. I watched him for a long time before I said anything. I didn't even know what I was waiting for. Maybe for him to look me in the eye. Maybe for a sliver of guilt to leak out between his words. But he just kept scrolling, and sipping, and waiting for me to fill the silence. So I did. "Why didn't you come back?" He looked up like he didn't quite understand the question. Like he needed me to repeat it. As if it wasn't already screaming inside my chest. At the crash, I said, voice hoarse. Why didn't you come back for me? There was a flicker in his eyes then, a twitch in his jaw, but it passed as quickly as it came. She was bleeding. I didn't know how bad it was. She was crying, I said, steady. I was unconscious. Trapped. You didn't even check if I was breathing. He rubbed his hands together. Nervous habit. One I used to find endearing. You looked still. I thought maybe. He cut himself off, shook his head. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I had to choose. I stared at him. I wanted to laugh. Not the kind of laugh that comes from something funny, but the kind that bubbles up when your heart is breaking and your brain doesn't know how else to react. You had to choose, I repeated. He nodded slowly. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did hurt me. Silence again. Only the hum of machines and the quiet thump of my heart monitor filled the space between us. She's not just a friend, is she? I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at his hands. No, he said finally. There it was. I felt the truth settle over me like a cold sheet. Heavy. Final. How long? I asked, though I wasn't sure if I wanted the answer. Not long, he said quickly. Too quickly. It was recent. We ran into each other a few months ago. Things got complicated. Complicated. That was the word he used to describe betrayal, to describe cheating, to describe leaving your wife to bleed out on the side of the road while you rescued the woman you never really got over. You should have just left me before, I whispered. If you wanted to be with her, you should have had the guts to say it. I didn't plan for any of this, he said, leaning forward. It just happened. No, I said, meeting his eyes. You let it happen. He didn't argue. He just sat back in the chair and stared at the wall like maybe if he stayed quiet long enough, the world would undo itself. I didn't cry. Not in front of him. Not this time. Because somewhere inside all the pain, something else had started to grow, slow, quiet, and unfamiliar. It wasn't anger. Not yet. But it was close. The hospital room was always cold at night. It didn't matter how many blankets the nurses brought or how high they turned the thermostat. The chill settled under my skin like it belonged there. Quiet. Constant. Familiar. Daniel stopped coming after that conversation. No explanation, no follow-up. He just disappeared. Maybe he thought he was giving me space. Maybe he felt guilty. Or maybe it was easier to play house with Elise than to sit in a room with the woman whose life he'd shattered. The silence at first felt like relief. Then it started to feel like abandonment all over again. Nurses came and went. They changed IVs, took vitals, made small talk about the weather. No one asked about visitors anymore. I think they assumed he wasn't coming back. Eventually, so did I. I spent my hours staring out the narrow window, watching people come and go from the hospital entrance. Strangers with flowers, balloons, fresh hope. Some of them left crying. Some left smiling. They all had someone. I had a tray of cold soup and a view of the parking lot. I didn't want to talk to anyone. When my phone finally buzzed after 3 days of nothing, I turned it face down on the nightstand without looking. Messages could wait. Everyone could wait. Because I needed to sit in it, all of it. The wreckage. The silence. The truth. I thought about how much of my life I had poured into that marriage. The way I built my days around him. The way I softened corners of myself to keep him comfortable. I remembered the little things, how I always left the light on for him when he worked late. How I memorized his coffee order. How I texted him to drive safe even when I was angry. I wondered if he ever noticed. I wondered if Elise noticed now. My body hurt in places I couldn't name, but the worst pain was deeper. The ache of being invisible to the person I loved most. I kept asking myself what I did wrong. What I could have done differently. Was I too quiet? Too predictable? Did I stop being exciting? Did I become just a name on his mailbox? But the more I sat in that bed, alone with the beeping machines and the low hum of air vents, the more the fog started to lift. This wasn't about not being enough. This was about being too forgiving for too long. About bending every time he leaned away. About calling it love when it was mostly habit and fear of being alone. And now here I was. Alone anyway. But for the first time I started wondering if that might not be the worst thing. It took me 3 days to open my phone. I stared at it for hours like it might bite me. Like one glance at my messages would confirm the worst, that no one cared, that no one noticed I'd vanished into a hospital bed with a broken body and a bleeding heart. But when I finally swiped it open, the screen lit up with missed calls, unread texts, voice notes I hadn't listened to. Not from Daniel. Of course not. But from others, voices I hadn't let in for too long. My sister had called 7 times. So had Maya, my oldest friend, the one who used to come over with wine and movies and force me to take breaks from my perfect wife routine. Her last text was just 3 words. I'm outside. Answer. I hadn't even heard the knock. For the first time in days, I felt something shift. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. But I picked up the phone and called Maya back. She answered on the first ring. About time, she said. No hello, no small talk. I didn't know what to say. I whispered. You don't have to say anything. I'll come tomorrow. She did. With a bag of snacks, a blanket that smelled like her apartment, and that same chaotic, grounding energy I didn't realize I'd missed. She didn't ask questions. She didn't demand details. She just sat beside me, unwrapped a granola bar, and turned on the tiny hospital TV like we were just 2 friends killing time. And when I did talk, really talk, she didn't flinch. I told her everything. About Elise. About the crash. About Daniel standing in the rain holding someone else while I was left behind. My voice broke halfway through. My hands trembled. But Maya just listened. No pity. No gasps. Just presence. You didn't deserve that, she said simply. Then she added, you've always carried too much alone. That sentence stayed with me. Later that evening, my sister called again. This time I answered. Her voice cracked when she heard mine, and she asked if she could fly in. I said yes. I didn't think I'd want company, but the truth was I didn't want silence anymore. Not the kind that made me feel like I didn't exist. Over the next few days, the room filled. Cards arrived. Small gifts. Stories. Laughter that didn't feel forced. I hadn't realized how much of myself I pulled back from everyone just to keep one man happy. And now that he was gone, they came rushing in. Not to fix me, not to judge me, but to remind me I hadn't disappeared. One night, after everyone left, I lay there in the dim light, staring at the ceiling. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. The day I decided to leave him, nothing dramatic happened. No screaming. No final straw. No secret messages discovered or confrontation at the door. It wasn't fire. It was quiet. A calm kind of knowing that settles in your bones when you're just done. I was sitting by the window in a wheelchair, the nurse having just helped me out of bed. The sun had finally returned after days of gray skies, spilling soft light across the linoleum floor. It should have been a peaceful moment, but my mind was somewhere else, somewhere sharp and clear. Daniel hadn't called. Not once since our conversation. Not a text. Not even a forwarded message from a friend, checking in on his behalf. And that silence didn't hurt anymore. It confirmed something I think I already knew, that he was never going to be the man who stayed. Not for me. Not when things got hard. He had made his choice, and I was making mine. I looked down at my hands, thinner now, the skin pale from days indoors. But they didn't shake anymore. There was strength returning quietly, not just physically but in a way I couldn't explain. Something about surviving what I did, the betrayal, the pain, the abandonment, had burned away all the noise. I thought about the version of me who waited by the door, the one who justified every absence, who softened every edge of herself to avoid conflict. She wouldn't have done this. She would have clung tighter, begged for another chance, asked him what she could change. But that woman didn't survive the crash. This version of me, the one held together with pins and stitches and stubbornness, wasn't going to beg. When my sister came later that day, I asked her to bring my laptop. My voice was steady when I said it. No tears. No hesitation. She didn't ask why. She just nodded and returned an hour later, setting it gently on my lap like it was a piece of armor. I logged into our shared accounts. Bank. Bills. Subscriptions. I started pulling my name out of places it didn't belong anymore. I emailed a lawyer my aunt had recommended. Just a simple message. I'm ready to file. Every click, every password entered, every form filled. It all felt like reclaiming something. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not Maya, not even my sister. I needed this decision to be mine without influence, without permission. I had spent years making choices around someone else's comfort. Not this time. It wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about choosing myself finally fully after being chosen last for so long. Recovery was slower than I wanted it to be. The doctors warned me it would take time, that bones heal in silence and lungs need patience. But no one warned me about the parts that don't show up on an X-ray. The ones that don't bruise or bleed, but ache quietly in the background. Trust. Identity. The sense of who I was before it all came undone. Still, day by day I pushed through. Physical therapy was brutal at first. My legs felt like strangers, stiff, weak, unreliable. But the therapist, a kind woman named Joy, reminded me every session that progress doesn't always look like movement. Sometimes it's just showing up, breathing through the pain, not quitting. I held on to that. When I was strong enough to leave the hospital, I didn't go back to the house. I asked Maya to help me find a short-term rental, something small, somewhere quiet. We ended up picking a second-floor apartment that overlooked a park. The furniture didn't match. The kitchen was tiny, but it was mine. The first night there, I sat on the floor with takeout and paper plates, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. I turned off my phone and played music from an old speaker I hadn't touched in years. It felt like I was sitting inside the beginning of something, even if I didn't know what that something was yet. I started writing again. Nothing grand, just journal entries, bits of thoughts, small truths I hadn't dared speak before. It felt strange to see my own words on paper, like they belonged to someone else. But the more I wrote, the more I recognized myself in them. I began cooking meals for one without feeling sad about it. I found a yoga class nearby and signed up, even though I couldn't touch my toes. I bought fresh flowers from the weekend market and put them in cheap glass jars around the apartment. Sometimes I cried for no reason. In the morning while brushing my teeth. In the grocery store, standing in front of the cereal aisle. Grief sneaks in like that. Not always about love lost, but about time wasted and versions of yourself you'll never be again. But I let it come. And then I let it pass. I also started saying yes to things I used to avoid. A neighbor invited me for coffee and I went. A friend from work texted about a poetry night downtown. And I surprised both of us by showing up. No one knew what I'd been through. They didn't look at me with pity. They saw a woman who walked with a slight limp, who smiled easily, who carried something quiet behind her eyes but didn't let it weigh her down. I liked that version of me. She was new, unfinished, but she was real. It happened on a Tuesday. I hadn't planned on going out that evening. I was supposed to meet Maya for coffee, but she'd canceled last minute, and the apartment felt too quiet. So I decided to take a walk. Just around the block. The air was cool, the kind that makes you pull your sleeves down and walk a little slower. I didn't expect to see him, but there he was. Daniel. Standing at the edge of the park, next to the benches where parents usually sat with strollers and tired coffee cups. He looked the same in that way people do when not enough time has passed, like a memory still wearing the same jacket. His hands were in his pockets, his shoulders tense. And beside him, Elise. She looked at ease, confident. Her eyes scanned the path like she wasn't looking for anyone in particular, just absorbing the view. I almost walked past them without stopping, without looking, without risking the unraveling of everything I'd built since the crash. But something made me pause. He saw me first. Our eyes met and I saw it, that flicker. Recognition, surprise, and something else quieter. Maybe guilt, maybe curiosity. He didn't smile. Neither did I. Elise turned to follow his gaze. Her expression changed when she saw me. She didn't look smug, but she didn't look sorry either. Just composed, like she had made peace with the part she played. None of us spoke at first. It was a strange, weighted silence, the kind where everything already said still hung in the air. Finally, Daniel stepped forward. "I heard you moved," he said, voice low. I nodded. "I did. You look better," he added, like that counted for something. "I am." He glanced at the ground, then back at me. "I didn't think I'd see you again." I almost said same here, but it didn't feel necessary. Elise was quiet, her hand brushing his arm lightly. Not possessively, but enough to remind me where things stood now. She didn't apologize. I didn't expect her to. Daniel took a breath, like he had more to say. Something long. Maybe rehearsed. But I didn't want it. I should keep walking, I said. Not angry. Not cold. Just done. He looked like he wanted to reach out to stop me. Maybe to say sorry. Maybe to explain. But there was nothing left to explain. Take care, I added, stepping past them. And as I walked away, I didn't look back. Not once. The morning I took off the last bandage, the sky outside my window was overcast. The kind of soft gray that made everything feel quieter than usual. I stood in the mirror, fingers brushing the faint scar that trailed across my collarbone. A reminder, permanent but no longer raw. It didn't sting anymore. Not physically. Not in the way that made me flinch when I looked too long. It had been months since the crash. Since the betrayal. Since I stopped being the woman who begged to be chosen and started learning how to choose herself. I didn't have it all figured out, not even close, but my days had shape again. My mornings began with stillness instead of panic. My nights ended without waiting on a message that wouldn't come. There were plants in the windowsill now. A stack of books by the bed. Little rituals I'd picked up without noticing, like taking a walk before sunset, or buying myself fresh bread from the bakery down the street, just because I could. Sometimes I caught myself smiling at nothing. Piece of music. A smell from a nearby kitchen. The sound of rain on the rooftop. They were small things, but they belonged to me. Not shared, not borrowed. Not a background to someone else's life. One afternoon I signed up for a class at the community center, writing of all things. It felt strange and brave and oddly personal to share words I'd only ever whispered inside my head. I didn't tell anyone at first. I just showed up, sat in the back and listened. The instructor asked us to write about a turning point. My pen hovered over the page. For a second I thought about writing the word accident. But that wasn't it, not really. The real turning point wasn't when the car crashed. It was the moment I realized I had survived it. Not just the wreck, but everything that came after. The silence. The betrayal. The rebuilding. That's when the page started to fill. I wrote like someone who remembered her voice. Like someone who no longer needed to be small to feel safe. Like someone whose story didn't end in the wreckage. And when the class ended, I didn't rush out. I lingered in the hallway, chatting with a woman who sat 2 seats away. We laughed about how hard it was to write about yourself without sounding dramatic. She offered to grab coffee sometime, and I said yes without hesitating. It wasn't about starting over. It was about starting different. One slow, brave, ordinary step at a time.